The morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows of my apartment, brushing gold across the polished oak floor. I smoothed the silk blouse over my shoulders, noticing the faint crease near my left collarbone, a small imperfection in an otherwise perfect day. My phone buzzed on the marble countertop, and I hesitated, heart fluttering as I saw the message. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, Aunt Diane." I smiled, a little too quickly, trying to hide the flutter of nerves beneath my calm exterior. Tomorrow was my brother's wedding, and while everyone expected me to be thrilled for him, part of me always felt like I was on the edge of watching my own past replay. I took a deep breath, inhaling the aroma of the coffee brewing in my French press, and let my eyes wander to the city skyline. Everything looked serene, ordered, like the life I had built for myself, but the memory of Aunt Diane's words, sharp and cutting, tugged at the edges of that calm. When I replied, "I can't wait either," I could almost hear her sharp, half-teasing, half-critical voice in my head. That voice had a way of making me question everything I thought I had earned, every step I had taken to stand tall. My fingers traced the edge of the marble countertop, grounding myself in the present, even as memories threatened to pull me back into the shadowed corners of my childhood home. I was supposed to feel joy, excitement. Yet under the silk and the perfume and the glossy veneer of success, I felt the familiar mix of hurt, pride, and defiance, waiting quietly, ready to remind me of all the ways I had once been underestimated. I was 15 when Aunt Diane first told me I'd never amount to anything beyond the walls of our small hometown. I remember standing in the sunlit kitchen of our old family house, the linoleum sticky under my bare feet, clutching a crumpled letter from my high school art teacher praising my sketches. "You think this is going to get you anywhere, Lily?" she had asked, her voice sharp as the knife she was chopping vegetables with. "You need something practical. Something real. Not dreams." The lump in my throat was so heavy I could barely swallow. I wanted to tell her that I did have dreams, that I was more than the quiet girl who faded into the background at family gatherings. But the words stuck, tangled in fear and disbelief. My hands shook, and I gripped the edges of the kitchen counter until my knuckles went white. I ran upstairs to my room, slamming the door, the echo bouncing off the peeling wallpaper. My sanctuary smelled faintly of old books and rain-damp carpet. On my desk sat a small, worn journal that had belonged to Grandma Eleanor, whose gentle encouragement had always been my lifeline. I flipped it open to a page she had written years ago. "Lily, the world belongs to those who dare when everyone else doubts. Trust yourself, even when they don't." Her words had become a quiet drum in my chest, a rhythm that kept me from collapsing into despair. That afternoon, I packed my sketchbook into a small canvas bag, wiped away the tears, and promised myself that I would not stay small, not because Aunt Diane doubted me, but because I owed myself the chance to rise. The decision was both terrifying and liberating. I didn't know how I would do it, didn't have a roadmap, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of rebellion fused with hope. I began to sketch, to dream, to imagine a life beyond the suffocating critiques and dismissals. Each line on the paper became a step toward independence, each stroke a defiance of the voice that had tried to make me small. That night, lying in the dark, I pressed my hand over the worn words in Grandma's journal, vowing that one day they would see, not her voice, not Aunt Diane's, but mine, clear and unshakable. After high school, I left our small town with nothing but a battered suitcase, my sketchbook, and the quiet echo of Grandma Eleanor's words in my mind. I moved to Chicago, the city that never slept and seemed to pulse with possibility. The streets were crowded, loud, and intimidating, but every honking car and bustling cafe made me feel alive in a way that my old kitchen never had. My first months were brutal. I took odd jobs, waiting tables in a cramped diner, assisting a chaotic print shop, even sketching murals for a children's art studio. Each night, when I returned to my tiny apartment above a laundromat, I would collapse onto the mattress and pull out my sketchbook, letting my imagination spill across the pages. I was exhausted, broke, and constantly doubting myself, but every line I drew, Every little success reminded me why I had left. Then I met Evelyn Carter, a seasoned graphic designer with a studio downtown. She saw me sketching in the park one afternoon and asked to see my work. I hesitated, half expecting her to dismiss me like Aunt Diane had, but Evelyn's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "You've got something," she said simply. "Let me show you how to turn it into a career." Evelyn became my mentor, my guide through the complicated world of design, branding, and entrepreneurship. She pushed me harder than anyone had before, sometimes painfully so, but I thrived under the challenge. I spent hours learning programs, pitching ideas, networking with strangers, and slowly building a name for myself. The first time I landed a paying client who believed in me, I cried alone in my apartment, the city lights streaming through my window like confetti celebrating a victory only I could see. Over the years, I grew my business quietly. I rented a small studio space, filled it with canvases, sketches, and personal touches that reminded me of home without holding me hostage to it. I didn't post much on social media. My family didn't need to know I was thriving. Aunt Diane and the rest of them assumed I was struggling, living modestly, still dependent. The secret was intoxicating in its own way, a small revenge that tasted like independence. I faced countless nights of doubt, wondering if I was enough, if my work would ever matter beyond the city limits. But with each project, each client, each small win, I proved to myself that the life I had imagined in Grandma's journal was possible. I became fluent in resilience, strategy, and patience. And quietly, invisibly, I built a life that was mine, successful, secure, and unshakably my own. Looking back, the loneliness, the fear, the uncertainty, they had all been essential. Without them, I wouldn't have appreciated the quiet triumph of my first major contract, the thrill of designing something that people loved, or the intoxicating knowledge that I had outgrown the limitations imposed on me. I had learned to walk through the fire and emerge unburned, carrying the ember of my own ambition wherever I went. The night before my brother's wedding, I arrived at the family home with a quiet sense of anticipation. The house smelled like polished wood, faint perfume, and the lingering sweetness of Aunt Diane's baking. I stepped into the familiar foyer, heels clicking against the marble, and was greeted by familiar faces, relatives who hadn't seen me in years, all smiling, all expecting the timid, struggling version of me. "Lily, you look good," Aunt Diane said, her voice a mix of surprise and polite curiosity. I smiled, letting her assess me as she always did, measuring me against the person she thought I should be. I let them settle in the living room, letting the evening chatter flow around me. The old sofas were worn but spotless. Family portraits lined the walls, each one a snapshot of expectations and history. And there I was, in the center of it all, my secret life tucked beneath my calm exterior. Finally, I asked if we could step into the study, a room they all remembered as my quiet refuge during childhood. It was a small, deliberate act, pulling them into a space that now mirrored the woman I had become. The walls were adorned with framed certificates, a few of my award-winning prints, and subtle nods to projects I'd worked on for major clients. On the mahogany desk lay a sleek laptop, glowing softly, a silent testament to the empire I had quietly built. I watched their eyes scan the room, noticing the subtle shifts in posture, the sudden straightening of backs, the widening of eyes. Aunt Diane's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her handbag. "I want you all to see something," I said, my voice steady, calm, but carrying the weight of years of restraint. I opened my laptop to my company's portfolio, showing websites I had designed, campaigns I had led, brands I had shaped. Then I revealed the numbers, the revenue, the growth, the clients who trusted me implicitly. Silence. Thick, heavy, almost tangible. They stared at me, mouths slightly open, eyes wide. The cousin who had always teased me about being lazy fidgeted with his cufflinks. Aunt Diane's jaw tightened, the color draining from her face. "I didn't just survive," I said, letting the words sink in. "I built. I created. I thrived. And all while you thought I was struggling, still dependent, still small." It was the first time anyone in that room saw me, truly saw me, not as the quiet girl who faded into the background, but as a woman who had forged her own path, unassisted, unbowed. The disbelief on their faces was almost painful to watch, but in that pain was acknowledgement, silent and undeniable. They had underestimated me, dismissed me, perhaps even wished for my failure. And here I was, proof that none of it mattered. Aunt Diane finally found her voice, barely above a whisper. I didn't know. You didn't look, I replied gently. You never asked. But I did it anyway. My tone wasn't bitter. It was matter-of-fact, the quiet authority of someone who had endured, learned, and grown beyond anyone's expectations. I let them linger in the room for a moment longer, letting the revelation settle, letting them grapple with the woman I had become. This wasn't just a reveal of success. It was a confrontation with every doubt, every dismissal, every word that had ever tried to define me. And in that room, amid family portraits and the soft hum of the city outside, I finally felt the quiet satisfaction of being seen, not as they thought I should be, but as I truly was. The next morning, as wedding preparations hummed around the house, I felt a quiet shift in the air. Family members moved with tentative respect, no longer assuming I was fragile or struggling. The small victories of last night, the acknowledgement in their eyes, the hesitation in Aunt Diane's voice, had shifted the balance. I realized I now held a subtle, undeniable authority, and with it came the choice, what I would allow and what I would not. I called Aunt Diane aside first. She looked uneasy, fidgeting with the pearl bracelet she always wore. Lily, she began, but I held up a hand. Listen, I said, my tone calm but firm. I want to help you understand me and to move forward with some clarity. But there are conditions. I watched her swallow hard, nodding slowly. First, I continued, I need honesty. No more dismissive comments, no undermining anyone's efforts, especially mine. Words shape reality, Aunt Diane, and I refuse to let negativity dictate my life or yours. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, relief and guilt warring across her face. Second, I said, turning to the cousins who had laughed at my teenage ambitions, I want you to pursue your own passions genuinely. Stop competing against others' expectations. Find what excites you, and give it your all. Their eyes flickered between curiosity and discomfort. It wasn't easy for them to hear, but they nodded. I addressed my parents last. I had loved them fiercely, but needed them to understand the life I had built on my own. I'm proud of you both, I said, but you need to let go of the old assumptions. Respect the paths I and all of you choose, without judgment. Each condition was not punishment, it was a doorway to growth. I mixed firmness with empathy, because authority, without compassion, felt hollow. I wanted them to recognize that change wasn't just about me proving something, it was about each of them evolving into the people they were capable of being. The day passed with quiet cooperation. Aunt Diane, who had always been controlling, hesitated before speaking, then chose words carefully, with more thought than critique. My cousins wandered off to work on personal projects, and my parents began listening more, judging less. The atmosphere was still tentative, but it had shifted from old tension to cautious possibility. I realized that power wasn't about dominance, it was about setting boundaries, demanding respect, and offering guidance. I had survived neglect and dismissal, and now I wielded the authority that came naturally from self-respect and accomplishment. The room, once heavy with expectation and judgment, now vibrated with potential, the kind that comes when people are given a chance to see themselves, not through the lens of the past, but through the possibility of who they could become. By evening, I stepped back and allowed them space to process, knowing that real change couldn't be forced, it could only be nurtured. And as I observed them beginning to shift, a sense of calm pride settled over me. I had confronted the past, revealed the truth, and now held the future, not just my own, but theirs, within the framework of honesty, growth, and mutual respect. The wedding day arrived with a kind of bright, hopeful sunlight that made everything seem possible. I watched my brother laugh with his new wife, radiant and nervous in equal measure, and for the first time in years, I felt an unburdened joy that wasn't filtered through expectation or doubt. The house buzzed with energy, cousins chatting excitedly, parents smiling with pride, and Aunt Diane moving around with a careful attentiveness that suggested she was learning patience. I caught myself thinking about Grandma Eleanor's journal, its worn pages full of quiet wisdom. I traced the memory of her words, "Trust yourself, even when they don't." That small, folded page had been my talisman through every lonely night, every doubt-filled day, every small victory and setback. And now, as I moved through the house, hearing laughter and seeing small, subtle changes in my family, it felt like her words had come full circle. Aunt Diane approached me quietly, her hands no longer fidgeting, her gaze steady. "Lily," she said softly, "I see you. I finally understand." I smiled, warmth rising in my chest, but I didn't need her to say more. Her acknowledgement, tentative as it was, mattered far more than any apology or explanation. The cousins, too, had started conversations about their own dreams. One was sketching again, another planning a small business, and the one who had teased me had begun asking questions about my work, not with judgment, but with genuine curiosity. I realized then that change doesn't come from grand speeches or dramatic confrontations. It comes from seeing someone else live their truth and choosing to step into it themselves. As I stepped out onto the balcony, the city stretching beneath me, I allowed myself a quiet moment to reflect. The pain of my past, the moments of doubt, the dismissals and criticisms, all of it had shaped me, yes, but it had not defined me. I had built the life that was authentic, strong, and unapologetically my own. And more than that, I had shown my family that growth was possible, for them as much as for me. Clutching the small journal in my bag, I whispered a soft thank you to Grandma Eleanor. Her wisdom had carried me here, had turned fear into courage, and doubt into determination. And as the music swelled from the wedding below, I allowed myself a final, unshakable thought, a quiet declaration of who I had become. I am seen. I am capable. I am mine.